So your flight was canceled or very delayed. Are you just screwed? Can you get any money back? Let's find out. Hi, it's Melissa here at Ready to Go, where we discuss tips and resources to help you plan your very own travels and create unforgettable memories and experiences. Now, canceled flights or significantly delayed flights have been happening a lot in the past year, mainly due to staffing shortages. Now, while this is very frustrating when it happens, and there isn't much we can do at that very moment, there are regulations around the world that have been put in place to determine what type of compensation passengers are entitled to from the airlines. Now, obviously, covering this info for every single country around the world would be prohibitive. So in this video, we'll review those regulations that cover 30 countries, namely for passengers in the US, the UK, Canada, and the European Union. Now stay tuned, as at the end of this video, I'll share some secret tips as to how you can choose flights that are much less likely to be canceled or delayed. If you're finding value in this video, please give it a thumbs up and write any questions or suggestions in the comments below, and we'll work to get you the answers you need. So in a previous video, we discussed trip cancellation and trip interruption insurance. What we want to do today is go over what are your options if your flight is canceled or delayed, whether you have insurance or not. Now, every airline has different policies and some flexibility as to what they offer their passengers in these situations. But what we really want to focus on today are those regulations that apply to all airlines based on the country you're flying into or out of. Please note that these regulations can change at any time, so the ones we're discussing today are the ones applicable currently in August 2023. Number one, flights to, from, and within the European Union. We'll start with the European Union as it's a very popular summer destination and currently includes 27 countries. Now, they've put in place some very clear rules for passenger compensation when there is a canceled or delayed flight. Now, these rules apply to the following flights: all flights departing the EU, all flights within the European Union, and flights returning into the EU operated by an EU airline. What helps with their portal is that you can select your circumstance and very quickly get the answers you need. You have a right to compensation for a flight cancellation if you were notified less than 14 days prior to your departure date and that the cancellation is not due to extraordinary circumstances. The EU defines extraordinary circumstances as air traffic management decisions, political instability, adverse weather conditions, and security risks. Basically, reasons that are completely out of the control of the airline. Now, an important note here is that a strike by the airport staff is considered an extraordinary circumstance that is not within the control of the airline. So, in a nutshell, you're eligible for compensation for a flight cancellation if it is due to a technical problem with the aircraft or a strike by the air carrier staff. And again, this only applies if you were advised of the cancellation less than 14 days before your departure. So similar to flight cancellations, passengers are only compensated for flight delays if they are not due to extraordinary circumstance. Compensation for flight delays is applicable if you've arrived more than 3 hours late to your destination. Now, the amounts of compensation are the same for flight cancellations or delays, and they're clearly outlined in this table. So if you find yourself in this situation, I'm posting the link to the EU regulations in the description below, and I highly recommend that you read those terms to know if you're eligible and how to go about making that claim. Number two, passengers in the UK. Now, as the UK is no longer part of the European Union, their rules are different and I would say not as clear-cut as those of the EU. For the UK, those rules apply to the following flights: all flights within the UK, all flights from the EU, Iceland, Norway, or Switzerland flying into the UK, flights arriving into the UK with a UK or EU airline, and flights arriving in the EU with a UK airline. So yeah, a little bit more complicated. You'll want to read those again. Now, the circumstances regarding when compensation is applicable and what you get in terms of compensation are a lot more complex and detailed than those of the EU, as you can see here with the various compensation tables. So I'm including the link to all this information in the description below for your reference. Number 3, Canada. So the rules put in place by the Canadian Transportation Agency are applicable to Canadian airlines only, namely Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transat, Porter, Sunwing, Swoop, and Flair. And the amount of compensation will be based on whether it is considered a large airline or a small airline. The size of the airline is indicated in the terms and conditions of your ticket. Now, as examples, Air Canada and WestJet are currently considered large airlines, while Sunwing and Flair are considered small airlines. Of course, the categories of large and small airlines can vary from one year to another based on the number of passengers carried. Now, you're eligible for compensation if a flight cancellation was due to a reason within the airline's control and not related to safety, and that you were notified of it 14 days or less before departure. For flight delays, you're eligible if you arrive 3 or more hours late to your destination. You can see here the different amounts of compensation for large and small airlines based on the number of hours you are delayed. The amounts of compensation are the same for both canceled and delayed flights. These amounts are listed in Canadian dollars. Now, you have 1 year to make your compensation claim to the airline, and they are obligated to respond to you within 30 days. I'll also leave the link to this page from the Air Passenger Protection site in the description below. Please review it if you think this is applicable to you. Number 4, passengers in the US. Now, as a US passenger, am I entitled to compensation if my flight was canceled or significantly delayed? Well, the short answer is no. In the US, airlines are under no obligation to compensate passengers in these situations. If a flight is canceled, the airline's only obligation is to rebook you on another one of their flights to the same destination. Now, you can ask if they can book you on another airline, and they may, but they're under no obligation to do so. Now, what's important to know is that if your flight is canceled, you do have the option to ask for a refund of your ticket, even if you've purchased a non-refundable ticket. So in the description below, I've posted the link to the relevant page from the US Department of Transportation so that you can consult it and keep it as a reference. Now, if you're flying into the US from another country, then you may have some recourse based on the regulations of that country. So for instance, if you're flying in to the US from a country in the European Union, or if you're flying into the US from Canada on a Canadian carrier, then you might be eligible for compensations that we discussed earlier. So now for those secret tips I promised, what are some things that we can do to ensure that we book flights that are much less likely to be canceled or delayed? First, we want to Google which airlines have the highest percentage of on-time flights, and where possible, book within the top 3 airlines. 2, where possible, choose an airline that has multiple flights per day to that same destination or to destinations nearby, so that it makes it much easier to rebook you on another flight if your flight is delayed. 3, book direct flights where possible, avoiding a sequence of multiple flights. 4, book the earliest flight in the day. This will eliminate the risk of having your flight delayed due to the aircraft arriving late from its previous destination. Now, I hope you found this episode helpful. To make sure you never miss out on any new content, click that notifications bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so that you are always ready to go.